Welcome everybody for today. Today is a very last session of Pause Fest online breakthrough sessions. Very successful this was. It's the seventh session, seventh week. And what a beautiful panelists and topic we have today. Hire the right people and create a culture. Never been more important. So I want to begin by today acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that we gather and pay my respect to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today as well. Today, as I said, we have hire the right people and create a culture from Penny Shell, OMD Australia, Ashwin Ramachandra. Ramachandran, sorry, Sapien, and we have Daryl Tinworth from Shift. Today, there is new and he's replacing Viona from VY Consulting.
15 minutes notice, so please go careful on me, everybody.
Yeah, it's a 15 minutes notice, and Daryl was champion to accept it, and it's recruitment, and it's going to give us quite a different background of what he's experiencing. Well, he's been around for 12 years, something like that. Well, let's start with Daryl. Daryl has been in recruitment in tech, digital, and creative sector for 13 plus years in Melbourne. Began life at S2M Digital, a boutique recruitment agency looking after a creative desk. Over 6 years ago, Daryl started his own business, Shift Recruitment, and has partnered up with several groups offering fractional RPO talent solutions and hiring for individual briefs. Welcome, Daryl.
Thank you.
Penny Shell, CPO, OMD Australia, Chief Product Officer, previously holding media roles in strategy and leadership locally and globally. Her campaigns have been awarded around the globe. She was awarded BT 2021 Women in Media Award. Just wanted to ask if you can your audio off. There is. Okay, Rajesh. And Ashwin is CEO of Sapien. Ashwin has raised 200 million, now even more, 1.8 million more to that very recently for healthcare and life science startups and founded Sapien, an at-home male fertility diagnostic startup with experience in venture building and diplomacy. He consulted for iconic institutions like UN, Nike, and Estee Lauder. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about, well, I already said it a few times, hiring right people and creating a culture. See how we can maximize the creative potential, HR, adopt people-first approach, understand the future of startup hiring and what's happening currently in the market. So I want to drop the big question today. Again, how do you then hire the right people, and how do you build a culture in current markets? And up for anybody, it's for everybody, this question.
Well, I think it's first really important to understand what your company culture is, what your values are, before you can reach out and hire for it. But one of the main things that I've learned recently is that, when you see a job ad talking about, we want people to kind of fit our culture, that's probably the wrong terminology these days. You want people to add to culture. And I think one thing we've learned over the last 3 years is that we can't be too afraid to hire people who are a little bit different or approach things a little bit different to how your company structure operates, because that can add some really interesting angles into your business and sort of delete that sort of homogenous way of looking at problems and solutions. So your business overall can be a lot more progressive, and we all use these words, progressive and inclusive. But to actually do that, you've got to practice it and look for people who can add to culture rather than fit cultures.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, there's an echo. But I'd absolutely agree with Daryl. I think culture is co-created today, whereas perhaps previously it used to be inherited or expected that, yeah, that people would fit the mold. I think if we look even to when I first started in media, which was sort of late 90s, early 2000s, was very much an aspiration of everyone starting out to climb the corporate ladder. That's no longer the aspiration of the people that we're hiring today. You know, they want to leave an impact on whether it's the culture that they're working for, or they might have a side hustle and create their own. And I think that we need to be able to lean into that. And we need to be able to think about hiring for people who can help to shape our business and where perhaps our own white space is and what we might look to flex to rather than just expecting a certain skill set. I'd absolutely agree with Daryl too about the diversity of experience. I think I run a strategy team of about, I think there's about 14 strategists nationally. I've lost count. But less than half of them had actually worked in a strategy capability previously. They'd had their own side hustles or they'd come to us from creative. So thinking about that diversity of skill set and how actually we can be more generalist in our hiring approach rather than specialist.
Thanks, Penny. If I can just, sorry, Ash, if I can just kind of insert here, and you've mentioned side hustle a couple of times, and when I was sort of being employed, I kind of had always as a creative side hustle, but that has not been sort of seen as a good thing back in the past. How do you deal with that now, and how you encourage people to have it, and how that could contribute to the betterment of the organization?
I think you know, it's an overused word, flexibility, at the moment, but I think it's really important for us to acknowledge people's own passions, and if we can help embrace that and learn from them as companies as well, and perhaps not expect everyone to fit the mold, and that can be everything from their experience through to the hours we expect them to work. And if we can come to some sort of arrangement that works for the individual as well as for the company, you're going to see that return tenfold when it comes to loyalty, when it comes to values, when it comes to enhancing our skill set, and when it comes to an empowerment kind of culture. And I think that's really expected. It's been a shift, you know, that generationally, that used to really jar with me, you know, or and jar with a lot of our management, you know, when we sort of think, oh, but this is the way things are done, and our clients are used to operating on kind of a, you know, 8:30 to 5:30 model, and how is that going to work? But actually, we've seen such a richness of being able to learn from our staff's own side hustles, and even to provide a platform where it can be mutually beneficial. So I think it comes down to hiring for the individual rather than for the collective.
And not treating it as a threat as well.
100%. Yeah. I think as I said, it can be mutually beneficial if we start to acknowledge that everyone's got different skill sets, and actually we can provide platforms for each other.
Definitely. Ash, what's it like in startup? You've been in startup for a while, and it's very a wild space. Can change any second. How do you see it?
Well, look, I mean, I think from a hiring trends perspective, we're going to start to see, and already starting to see for a great deal of companies, well-capitalized pre-seed, seed stage companies will start to hedge their bets more on experience, hire more senior people, and set aggressive targets over the next few months, because it's starting to get more difficult to raise more capital without serious demonstration of outcome. Broadly, we are also seeing that a smaller pool of founders are raising a larger amount of capital, but raising a big pre-seed seed round definitely has its problems, and one of them is keeping growing your valuation over time, and whilst also demonstrating capital efficiency, which is the balance between growth and profitability metrics. And all of that inevitably translates to one thing, which is hire strong operators and hope they know what they're doing. And I've had I think a stint in startup where there was a wave where we threw experience out the window, and we definitely favored hustle. And I think that there's definitely value in hustle, and I will reiterate that, but it's going to start and shift. We're already seeing well-capitalized companies at this stage favor experienced operators over solely young and ambitious founders and early entrants. And I think it's going to be particularly a problem for founders that have never hired before, let alone manage an experienced team of operators, because the last thing you want is to have an experienced team that's expensive and underutilized. So we're going to start seeing quite a bit of changes, I suppose.
Yeah, a lot. Well, that's opening quite a lot for this topic, and we only have maximum 45 minutes. If you guys have any questions, please pop it and I'll pick it up anytime during the conversation. I want to ask you, Penny, about what does people first approach mean to you when hiring an executive?
As I was sort of saying, I think when you think people first, you've got to start with what the individual, I guess, stands for themselves, and how they can help shape the business rather than just fit the mold. I'd invite them to challenge it and have a point of view, and really, I guess, be flexible when you're interviewing in terms of what you want, how you might look to flex your business as well. As I said, what does a win-win look like? Like what are we prepared to be more flexible on, and what are the non-negotiables? So, yes, there might be logistics that are that can't be flexed around, whether it's operating hours, or whether it's tech capabilities, or any sort of skill sets. But then you might look to flex in the locations that you operate from, or the experience that the individual has from the background. So really thinking about what they need and the unique skill set that they can bring, rather than just the agenda of the business. The ability to customize the role for the individual. There's been a few times that we've gone in with a set job description, and actually then we've looked to kind of co-create elements of that together, because there's a unique skill set that you've uncovered from the individual's passion points or talents that you hadn't necessarily thought of when you were first hiring for that capability. So I think that's really about people first, is understanding the talents and the capabilities and the requirements of the person that's hiring, and where they might be able to fit, even if that's not necessarily within the originally designed structure of the role.
Yeah, and currently what we've seen, what pandemic kind of forced us to do is, be super flexible and allow work from home, allow things that before were not even allowed to be mentioned, I suppose. And so I guess for you, Penny, and anybody in hiring and culture people, HR, there's a lot more work, I guess, being tailoring these roles for them. How does that work overall? Where is the culture of the team if everyone's working from the home? How do you then engage people? How does this new feel of belonging kind of happen in a company?
It's a really good question. I think I'm really lucky in that I'm in a creative industry. So that empowerment of the individual is really important. However, there's 200 people in our Melbourne office. There's another 300 in our Sydney office. And those opportunities to unite are critical for team connection, and to make sure that there is a real sense of culture across the board. So we do have guidelines. They're not strictly enforced because of that level of trust. And we talk about flexibility, but the guidelines are generally, let's try and agree together on 2 days that we might all come in team by team, or where might we have a group outing or a destination. We might meet. It doesn't have to be anything that costs money. We might just go and sit in the State Library in Melbourne and have a session there together. That's a location that's convenient to everyone, but it's again about those moments of unity that kind of it gets us out of our own heads as well. But agree on those parameters together as a team. What are the channels that we prioritize for? Our WhatsApp channel is strictly for banter, or it's for connections, or it's for kind of inside information. It's not for sending work requests on a weekend. Whereas, our Teams channels or our email channels have very different roles that have all been agreed upon as a team. So we've kind of got these set structures in how we communicate. There is some guidelines in terms of, once a month, we have to get together for a cultural event. As I said, that doesn't have to be something that necessarily costs us money, but it's something that's passion fueled. It can be at someone's home. It can be at a park, at a destination, at a client's, at a location that's relevant to our client, or we can just go out for dinner. But something that helps to fuel and foster that culture. Really interestingly, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, there was a big push to get everyone back in the office for an all agency presentation on a Friday afternoon. The last people to leave the building actually left at 4 a.m. I'm not sure that that's necessarily a great thing for keeping the office clean, but it was a really great demonstration of culture. Is once everyone actually got back together, that fueled more and more hunger. And we've seen, look, there's more than 80% of our staff in the office in any given day. So I think if there's enough flexibility, if everyone feels that they can kind of weigh in on the priorities for connection, then we've actually seen that they've helped to shape those rules and kind of guidelines. So they've generally adhered to them.
Fantastic. So the trust is put back into the people's kind of hands, and it goes both ways. It's amazing. Anybody else wants to add to this?
Yeah, well, look, I think, if there was one good thing about the pandemic, it was really to move all of those employer obstacles about what working from home will look like, and has kind of forced them to trust their employees, which is brilliant. And now we're in a position where hybrid working is pretty much the norm. And any candidate I speak to want hybrid working. They want to go into the office to reiterate those points that Penny was just making, because they want those connections. But what it has done is it's allowed people to kind of incorporate the other things in their life which are important, like taking kids to school, being there on a Friday assembly, speaking from my own experience, to do all those other little nuances in your life which you can't do if you're in an office in the city or something like that. So we really are sort of come out the other side in this sort of trusting relationship with your employer, where you can also have that flexibility in your life to do the other things which are important. And you end up working probably more hours anyway, because you're all set up at home these days. And, it's easy to kind of dip in and dip out outside of those business hours that you would normally work if you have to. And a lot of people want to.
Yeah, and different hours that if you do take time off, then you kind of add a later in a day or beyond 5 p.m. type of stuff.
Yeah, or, things are less kind of, you're at work at 9 o'clock and you leave at 5. They can be more sort of driven by the outcomes that you're trying to do.
Yeah. Ash, do you want to add something to this in terms of startup?
It was a very different experience to start with, because we started the company bang in the middle of the pandemic in Melbourne. It was really difficult for me to organise a team and get everybody motivated enough and buy into the idea when we weren't really having enough face time. So we switched to a model whereby we went on walks every other day to try and catch up as a team, so we can get people motivated and get to know each other a little bit better before we put them in the deep end and try to get them to be productive as an organisation. Because we found when you're a relatively small team and you're starting in the middle of a pandemic, it becomes really difficult to get buy-in when you're not meeting people and you don't really understand what the culture looks like, because you're responsible for shaping it and there's no one really moving any of the pieces around. That was a really difficult start, but over the last couple of years, we've made it sort of work. We do 3 days a week in the office for the most bit, and we've still hired remotely internationally and in other states, and it's worked a lot better.
Okay, and just maybe to extend with that, what you're just saying, generally speaking, information startup phase, such as yours during pandemic, or in general, what you found, what's the best practice hiring and firing people with the least damage? Because it's damage anyway. You look at it to business. What's the smoothest possible kind of way that business could sort of sail?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a lot of considerations here, and there's no real binary way to look at hiring and firing people. But to oversimplify within a startup setting, hiring people at the formative stages really happens for two primary reasons. You are either hiring to meet a skills gap, or you want to build and move quicker. When you're hiring people early stages, it's just, I think, imperative to understand that it is going to cost a little bit more than you think it's going to. You need to factor into consideration insurance, superannuation, BAS, learning periods, and the opportunity cost of making a bad hire for early stage startups, which can be quite devastating, and will have an impact on your resources and culture. But with regard to firing people, the real tough bit is knowing that it's going to be inevitable. You're going to often pivot, and the shifts in business models are always going to happen. Not everybody that you've hired will align perfectly with those changes. The early stages specifically, I think it's hyper important to assess performance and fit on a continual basis. And when it becomes evident that there is a misalignment, there is a need to act quickly and very decisively. And that's really difficult to do, especially if you're a first-time founder. And it's super tough, but there's a lot at stake, I suppose, because there's a resource and a growth implication. but there's also a morale implication within the team, particularly when you're a smaller team. And I think for the least damage, one, you set expectations very clearly, but two, also when you hire people, you learn to acknowledge that there is an onus on you as an employer to provide your employees with the right resources, because if you don't, you're effectively setting your team up to fail. Three, you provide continuous feedback, and four, be quick and try and be less of a dickhead.
Yeah. What do you think about what Gary says? Fire faster, promote faster, I think it says.
I don't know what exactly the saying is, but I mean, effectively, did you say fire fast, promote faster? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that there's ways to look at it. When you know it's time to fire someone, do it quickly and then be decisive about it, be compassionate. But at the same time, I think there's always opportunities to evaluate where someone else could be a better fit. And I think I'd start there. And when you're firing people, make sure it's not really surprising that you're firing someone, unless obviously you're in a redundancy situation or you're in a situation whereby a startup isn't raising enough capital to be able to sustain the operations. But I think it's imperative to identify good people and reward good things, but also be very careful what you appreciate within a startup, because that can build good culture or bad culture. Because bad hires are as a result of bad employees and also bad employers. So I think those two factors.
Great, thanks, Penny. Well, everybody. I mean, we hear a lot of people have been letting go in different types of organizations, and in a bigger systems, bigger companies. How do you deal with such a sort of terms of firing and hiring?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's such sensitive times at the moment. And I think we've gone from one extreme to the other. 12 months ago, we were talking about having a talent crisis, and now we're at the stage where there are real financial ramifications to clients cutting costs and to the current economic climate. We've been fortunate in that we haven't had to let anyone go due to economic kind of status of the business currently. However, at the start of COVID, there were 11 redundancies that we needed to make. We acted fast, and we certainly got ahead of that. I know that there were other agencies in market at the time that it was more drip fed over those 2 years of the pandemic, and that actually led to a lot of instability and insecurity for staff. Yeah, I think as we're all done within the first 2 months potentially of the pandemic first starting, and then we were able to protect and double down then. I think there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all model to this. There's going to be different realities for different businesses. Transparency is the most critical I think form of communication or action that we can take when it comes to the reality of the circumstances. I think actually being able to share where the business is at from all kind of all measures and metrics, and what actions need to happen have helped us certainly enable things like people taking their annual leave benefits, so making sure that those costs are taken off the books, or perhaps looking at restructuring if someone has elected to leave the company, looking at restructuring first rather than just rehiring to fill a gap. So we're always kind of on that hustle, I guess, to use one of Ash's words earlier, to make sure that we're optimizing rather than necessarily having to take that action. But where in the past we have had to take it, certainly acting hard and fast and definitively came back to reward us rather than sort of a wait and see approach.
Yeah, if you left and linger, there's a lot of insecurity that probably builds within the people.
I think,
culture,
yeah, culturally it can damage more than actually acting and also being able to look after the people that we did let go in those early days, with making sure that they were looked after for enough time for them to be able to find their next opportunity as well.
Fantastic. Daryl, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. I guess we're kind of in a position now that we haven't really faced before. I think within the sort of creative tech industries, you only really got made redundant if maybe the group you're working for lost a big client and there's no work for you anymore. But now sort of the term redundancy is quite common, but I'm seeing. So I guess my my point is that people are used to it a little bit, or if they haven't been directly affected by it, they've been reading about it, or probably have peers in the industry who have been affected by it directly. So if an employer is sort of going through a stage where they think they have to make people redundant, then they really need to pare back to their company values and start living them, because usually values would include something like Penny mentioned, which is transparency and honesty and communication, and handle a redundancy in the best way that you possibly can, which is being upfront, honest, and communicate, because your employees are not stupid. They can sort of read between the lines, and if you're not owning the situation, then you have a rumor mill starting, which will damage your culture and your business reputation for a long time. So to really sort of manage that process, you've got to be really on top of the communication and owning everything to it, and just being as honest as you practically can be.
The reality of some stories that I've heard is people coming to work with facing the news of not being employed anymore and their computers being shut off from accessing any of the files and things like that. So that's a kind of brutal reality that a lot of people have faced. It's not really acting on those, I guess, the culture and promise and the belief, but it's pretty much like hard cut.
Yeah, and it's not easy to make people redundant, and it also depends on the size of the group. If there's hundreds of people, then it's difficult to address everybody individually, but that really still needs to happen, because we are in a cost of living crisis, and it's difficult for people in general. But if you have no inkling whatsoever about what's happening in that scenario that you just described, you turn up and there's no job for you anymore. I fail to believe that there wasn't any prior warning or situational chats which could have happened before that.
Yeah. Okay, let me just pick up one of the questions from Francis. How do you foster a sense of belonging and connection in hybrid or fully remote workspace? Who's fully remote? Anybody fully remote? Or anybody can sort of maybe talk about this?
Fully remote probably means you're on a beach in Seminyak in Bali or something, so you're probably creating your own culture. But
would love to think that.
I think we were all fully remote for a couple of years, and I've certainly got my team is based in. I'm in Melbourne. Most of my team is in Sydney, and we have representatives in Brisbane as well. And it is hard. It's particularly hard when you've hired someone who's never had an in-person working relationship. So you have to kind of build that rapport from the start. I think we do a minimum of weekly catch-ups. So kick off the week, what's everyone got on, and a different member of the team chairs that. I'm really conscious of not always being the person that steers the conversation and the outcomes. So I'm kind of, it's self-volunteered, and everyone gets a voice within those forums to kind of chair those meetings. And it sounds really cheesy, but having kind of that warm-up kind of banter, like a bit of structured banter. Right, how's everyone going out of 10? How are you feeling? Like, we'll go around the virtual screen first. We generally have a cameras on policy, which helps. I mean, I think also, you're being invited into people's homes. There is a level of trust with that. So look, we found that there were a lot of people that started at OMD throughout the 2 years and had never come back or had never been in the workplace. They've now rejoined us, but there was certainly a sense of loyalty built just from I think making sure those moments of connection are not just about work. So even if there's not a reason to kind of all get on a call, making sure that it doesn't matter, it's Monday, it's 10 o'clock, we all jump on that call and we just have a chat if there's no kind of topics for discussion. Seems pretty obvious, but that's what we've found works.
The new digital rituals needed to kind of happen and develop organically, I suppose. We didn't know what to do. So that's definitely what potentially could bring this culture together. And
having a bit of fun too, like share the weird meme and the link to something, just trying to make sure that we're not just connecting about what needs to get done. you know, yeah, we've all done the Friday drinks as well, or the bingo, or the whatever it was at those times, and thank goodness that those have finished. But making sure that, you know, randomly, hey, I saw this, I thought of you, or, you know, a group viewing, or something of an industry kind of aligned event or occasion can help too.
Yeah. So it's not all business and transactional. It's more social. Ash, do you want to add anything to this?
Look, and the only other thing I'd say is every single time I'm traveling for work, I try to meet everybody that that we hire in that particular place just for a drink or something of that kind, just so we know we can maximize face time, and people know that we will catch up at some point.
Yeah. Penny, I want to kind of come back to you. We kind of getting close to maybe wrapping up. Hopefully, Francis, this is what it wanted to hear. A lot more digital coffee drinking, and just the random catch-ups. But in how are people and culture connected to the brand purpose? Any learnings from that?
Yeah, sure. I guess hopefully everyone's got a brand purpose that's defined. It doesn't have to be word perfect, or as Daryl said, at least knowing your values. And I think asking people what those values mean to them, or hiring intentionally. I know, you know, there's a bit of debate around, do we hire fast? I don't. I've gone without people in roles for a long time. You know, which has hurt me personally in terms of my work hours, but to make sure that fit is right, and to have a really clear idea of the types of values that you want to bring into the brand, I think is really critical. I would say with any learnings, I think really knowing the outputs of what you want that brand purpose to be. So what are, you know, in 12 months time, what are the proof points that you want that brand purpose to mean? I mean, for us, you know, diversity, equity, inclusivity was a big push in terms of how we hired. Our brand purpose at OMD is performance with integrity, and integrity means that everyone gets a voice, and that's true for our clients and our customers and our staff, and our audiences as well when we were targeting audiences. So that meant a shift. That meant we needed to make sure that we were investing in diverse media properties. That meant and we wanted to be the industry leader in those. So holding ourselves accountable to some numbers on that brand purpose, which actually meant that we were actively looking to recruit differently, was a stand that we took, that we're really proud of. That's one element from a diversity element. And there might be, you know, your brand purpose might be around creativity or connection. So what does that mean? And does that mean that you need to hire in different locations, or does that mean that you need to think about broadening your skill set, or think about hiring from different categories to really round out that brand purpose? So I think it's about really interrogating what the brand purpose is and what it means, and then what are the outputs of that, and how you can kind of attach some key requirements, deliverables to hold yourself accountable to hiring for brand purpose.
Thank you, Penny. Ash, in terms of being a very small startup and just kind of, I guess, building that sort of brand purpose with the culture, do you have anything to sort of add to what Penny said?
We've always had to make a decision on which one we're going to prioritize, or how exactly we're going to prioritize the difference between, say, culture and aptitude that someone's going to bring into the team. And that's a really difficult call for you to make as a startup, because people that you ultimately hire, if they've got bad attitude, and they contribute tremendously to the future of the business and the way you hire future people. So when we hired experienced people, it was very integral for us to try and think about what exactly we wanted the organization to look like in the next, say, five years or so, and to think through what kind of people these individuals will then go on to hire, and how they will contribute to the team. What exactly, ultimately, we're looking for people that are going to build functions. We're not necessarily looking for individual contributors today that will just come in and do a tiny piece of work. We're ultimately looking for these people to go on and take a more significant role as we grow the organization. So those considerations are really, really important. And we've been very surprised hiring people that we didn't necessarily think would originally fit the culture that I had in mind. But over time, you start to recognize that the differences in perspective that they add to the team, perhaps what will make us better tomorrow.
Fantastic. And to continue from that, knowing that you and if you guys haven't heard and joined earlier, Ash was talking about raising capital just before, and congratulations on that. Hard work. How have financing and hiring people affected or been impacted at the moment, and how's that going to be maybe in the future?
I touched on this a little bit earlier, but we've made a conscious decision to hire people that will build functions more than, you know, people that are going to be energetic, cheap today and get tiny pieces of work done. It was important for us to understand as we grew the business who exactly was going to be contributing for what in the next 2 years or so. And that meant all of our hires were senior and expensive. So that was a significant consideration. We were going to spend money, most of our capital that we raised actually, on people more than we were going to on marketing. And we were placing the bet that ultimately, if we hired good people, we were going to find a way to find the problems and solve them. And we have to a great extent, which is exactly why we've been able to raise more capital over time. But I think that will become a key sticking point for a lot of founders over the next few months. What are you going to prioritize particularly? And is an investment in talent worth it at this particular instance of time? And also, you're trying to hire in good faith. So you're trying to hire at a point in time where you can actually sustain this talent for at least another 12 to 24 months.
So your suggestion is to look at 2 to 5 years sort of terms still in these types of market when people hiring, so they can, at least if they are raising a capital, they can pitch to investors, we have this talent, we're going to be there at a certain point of time, and be able to raise the capital.
I'd say at least a couple of years as far as a startup is concerned, effectively, because you're trying to demonstrate outcome. If you're trying to just get tiny pieces of work done, I mean, as long as you set expectations very clearly with people that you're hiring. But ideally, as a startup, what you're trying to do is build capability, and you can only build capability when your people stick around with you for a while.
Yeah, fantastic. A lot to discuss here, and lots of it's a big topic again. Daryl, do you wanted to add something to this? I'm kind of trying to maybe wrap it up soon. We are there.
30 seconds to go. So yeah, I guess from my perspective, in terms of what I do, which is basically recruitment, it's the nuances I look for is that whole kind of attitude versus altitude thing. So the altitude thing, I can ask a candidate sort of almost client-led questions to assess their suitability, their qualifications, their experiences, skills, whatever the job is, but their needs, black and white stuff. But I kind of tend to focus or put more emphasis on the attitude, sort of the nuances, the things which aren't written on a CV, to kind of make sure that strategically they're, you know, they can add to somebody's culture, but ultimately they're swimming towards the same goal which my client might have. So what Ash mentioned there, you know, hiring people that, well, you didn't think they were culturally going to be correct, but they've ended up being sort of one of the best people in your business. So that's the kind of thing which which a good recruiter will do, is to kind of really delve into personality traits and tropes and make sure that they are essentially in line, because you can have everything ticked off from a skills and experience perspective, but they might be the worst hire you've ever had, even though they are, you know, on paper the best people for the role. So it's about sort of really, I guess, putting at least an equal emphasis on who the person is as a person and whether they fit your business and whether they can do the job, because you've really got to have both. And that kind of affects your whole brand equity and everything you have going forward, because, you know, as Penny mentioned, you know, they can help augment that as well.
Thanks. And maybe just to finish off on a question more, what is it, hiring talent at the moment, and building the culture, knowing what we sort of spoke about, it is become a lot more flexible than before pandemic, a lot more, needs to be a lot more transparent. We need to trust a lot of people. We need to really make sure that, how have you found so far this transition and finding the talent and having internal capabilities to actually address all this? How has that sort of perhaps transformed the business internally, and looking from Daryl, I guess, externally, what businesses do?
Well, from externally, I mean, it's made it a lot, sort of a hybrid working philosophy has made things a lot easier for me because people can get to interviews and do that kind of thing. So it was always very difficult to get somewhere to go from, East Melbourne to West Melbourne on a rainy Friday afternoon. But yeah, I guess to go back to your point, it's just difficult to say because there are a lot of candidates on the market at the moment who have been made redundant. And some of them, unfortunately, good people, good candidates, good skills, ordinarily would in an ordinary market would be picked up. And some of them have been, looking for a job probably longer than what they would have expected to. So it becomes sort of, I don't want to use the word desperate, but a lot of them are just sort of really looking for a job now. So they're perhaps not entirely picking roles which are 100% suited to them. So it's sort of where I'm often finding myself is sort of an amateur psychologist into steering them into the belief that they are actually, should focus on what their core experience and skills are, and sort of really start, keep believing in themselves almost, and sort of try to kind of connect them to groups which they can build bridges with either sort of now or in the kind of immediate future for them. But it's a difficult candidate market out there at the moment. I think from hiring groups, from employers, a lot of them have got really strong internal TA capability, and they're putting ads up, and they might get, I think I've seen one which had something like over 500 applicants, and it wasn't even 24 hours posted. So my worry from that perspective is, and it goes back to your brand values and brand equity, are you connecting to all those applicants? Or are you seeing the first 10 and picking from them? Because the 500th applicant may be the best one. And are you keeping your kind of, I guess, your cultural brand values in check by actually getting back to all of them? Because there's a lot of people applying at the moment who might be good for your job now or sometime in the future. And I get told by candidates all the time that they've made so many applications, they've had one company that's come back to them, and they remember all the ones that don't, unfortunately. So I think keeping hold of your brand equity at the moment is really key and difficult because there are so many applicants out there.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. It's a similar situation with the rental market. Currently, I've seen a friend posting a spare room, and within an hour, over 100 people reached out. So, anybody else wants to maybe address this?
I think I'd just say, and sorry about this, Daryl, but I'd say also use your network. Don't just think about the linear way to recruit. I think making sure that you're thinking of, particularly in a startup, so much of what you do is in isolation, but those opportunities to connect or to get a second opinion can really help. And just thinking about kind of the horizontal, not just the vertical, when you're looking to hire, I think has worked for me certainly in the past.
Thank you very much, all of you. Lastly, Ash, if you have last words, I'll take it. If not, we'll wrap it up.
Look, I mean, the only significant change on our end is actually think about the resources that we would need when we hire people to provide them in order for them to succeed. And you don't necessarily think about it that way when you're hiring in a good market. You've got an abundance of people. You've got abundance of people that you can hire if someone leaves. And now you've got to make things work. You're placing a big bet on people. And you need to make sure that when you're hiring someone, you're hiring them for the right reasons and you've got enough resources on your end to provide them. So we've had a lot more structure on our end when it comes to deciding when we need to hire someone and what exactly we can provide them in return.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who attended today. And thank you, beautiful panelists, and Daryl for joining us 50 minutes prior notice.
That was fun. Thanks.
It was fun. It was great. Wish you a happy weekend. And we'll publish this as soon as possible online for everybody to watch.
Thanks, George.
Thanks so much.
Nice to meet everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.